Hello, how are you? Hope you're doing well. Hey, guess what? It's a public holiday today because it's Friday of Easter weekend here in New Zealand at the moment. And if you're watching this over on YouTube, you missed it. There you go. Come and join us live on Twitch next time. And the link is in my YouTube profile. So there's another there you go. Go for it. Go on. It's a lot more fun. What am I doing? I am reading books at the moment. What else am I doing? I've been trying to do my own tech support for various tech issues I've been having still in different ways. The weather is nice after we were threatened with a really bad storm for the middle of the week. We got a bit of rain, got a bit of wind, but not too bad. Not in this particular part of New Zealand anyway. I think that's about it. I was able to do online grocery shopping and pick them up yesterday. That's great. I didn't have to go out and do other bits and pieces with lots of intense people. Oh, yeah, when we went into town to get the groceries, there was so much traffic. And I'm like, this is really weird. It's like it's Friday traffic, but today's only Thursday. And suddenly went, penny dropped. Easter weekend, even though it's Thursday, that's like Friday traffic, but super duper. Yeah. Anyway, so there you go. That's what's been happening here. And I hope it's all going well for you. And if it isn't, I'm really sorry about that. I know there's not a lot I can do about it, but I'm sorry to hear that life's not going so well for you at the moment, if that's the case for you. Anyway, I'm going to plug in my phone. I did check that I've got it on mute, so that's good. And I even checked that my headphones, which are the other things that can sometimes make a little bit of noise in the background, that they were also on mute, so we're doing well. I don't have my other bits open that I'm supposed to have open, so while you're chatting among yourselves, please do, I shall open those up. That one and that one. Yes, got them both. That one I don't actually need at the moment. I think I sorted out the problem with the subtitles showing over the top of the video permanently after I'd saved it, which has spoiled the last 3 or 4 that I did for over on YouTube, because there's nothing I can do to remove them. Those are just like permanently coded in. It's just one of those things. And I'm looking for something and I'm wondering what I'm looking for. I know I was thinking of something else I had to do, and I'm really sorry. I can't remember. Oh, I need the book. That's what it was. Can't do reading without the book, can we? Oh, dear. Terrible. And just waiting for it to unlock. And getting this in the right place. Oh, it's Friday. I can wear my little mini tiara, can't I? No, I've got one up here. I've got my homemade one. So I've just got somebody asking me if I wanted nice coffee, and I was just about to tell you that I've got my homemade version, which is coffee from the coffee machine topped up with cold milk. Yummy. And my book is on my first generation iPad mini. Great to keep them out of the landfill and all the other things like that. Keep them being used where you can, as long as it's in a secure manner, which mine is, because the only time it goes online is if I'm actually downloading an ebook to be able to read it to you. So there you go. Another there you go. I must say that a lot, I think. Maybe we should have a there you go count thing happening. I don't know. If you're seeing subtitles and you don't like subtitles, there should be a way that you can turn them off. If you hover your mouse, if you're on a computer, not on an app on a phone, if you hover your mouse over the screen, usually somewhere around here where I'm waving my finger around on the video, it should show you a little CC button, which is closed captions, and you can tell it to turn them off if you don't like seeing them. I have them on because some people, even if they are hearing, actually hear better if they can see words that are supposedly the right words at the same time. It's quite funny. The caption settings that I've had to use, you have to choose which language you're speaking in, so it knows what basically what dictionary to use. And it's got, for what it is, it's actually pretty good because it's got English, it's got US English, UK English, US English, Australian English, New Zealand English, and probably a bunch of other ones as well, but those are the ones that I see. And automatically anything like that, usually the first time you go to use it, it starts in US English because most of those programs are made in the States, and that's a big market. Often in the past, for other uses that do speech to text, I have had to choose Australian English because they don't have New Zealand, but this one does have New Zealand, and I tried it. The Australian works better than the American for my voice, the way I speak. The New Zealand works better than the Australian for my accent, which makes sense. The one that works best for my accent apparently is UK English, English, as our family calls it.
I'm sorry, but I have to.
And I do have to show you something. Please come and show us.
I have successfully applied car window tint to my pair of goggles, so I can now use them as subtitles. Not subtitles, as sunglasses.
Turn your head so we can see them a little bit with the angles. So they've got, that's it, where you've got the light shining off them. You can see the angled facets on them, and they seal around his face so you don't get the light leakage in. And it's really exciting because, if you wear glasses and you're light sensitive, normal sunglasses don't really work around the edges. You get all this light coming around the edges, even if it's helping with filtering on the front.
Indeed, trying to wear sunglasses over normal glasses is quite an issue, so I am quite happy to have tinted these.
So this is what they are. They're a replica version, a rebuild version of aviators goggles of a sort, and they've got a padded surround, and then they've got an elasticated headband just to make them work well. So there you go. So that's the excitement for somebody else in the family today, which is the voice that was asking me if I wanted one of my iced coffees. Not my homemade one, but one of the ones that is pre-made that I got in the groceries yesterday. And they're going to go off and have their one now. So I've got my homemade one ready to go. So here we go. Introduction for anyone who's new here. Hi, I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's stories, such as this sort of thing, really old-fashioned. If I don't have a physical copy of a book that I can read to you, I will read an ebook from my first generation iPad mini, which is keeping it out of the rubbish bin because it's still getting used. I do have we read old-fashioned children's stories because they're lots of fun. They help us to see the world the way other people used to see it. It helps us to expand our perception of the world and other people, other places, different time periods. Often they would write in their own time period, so it helps us to see how the world was back then, what was normal for them. Things that we need explanations of, they didn't. And often I will interrupt myself when I'm reading to explain a lot of those things because I grew up reading these old stories. Often they're Victorian or Edwardian stories that I'm reading. They're usually public domain. I try to keep to public domain. Not all of the stories I read are, but they're all very old. And the idea behind reading them is partly initially because they're fun. They're just different to everything else that's around at the moment. And it's great to just have a little bit of escapism. And it's nice to be able to have stories that children and adults can listen to. I do read up into probably what you would call early teens age bracket. So the book we're reading at the moment is Emily of New Moon. I think in the book she's about 11, but I'm not certain. By the time we get to the end of the book, I think she will still be in her mid-teens, but not her late teens. But there are two books that follow this that the author wrote. The author is Lucy Maud Montgomery, famous for having written Anne of Green Gables, and in certain circles Emily of New Moon is also famous, but nowhere near as famous. But she wrote two sequels to it, Emily Climbs and Emily's Quest, which I won't be reading, but you are most welcome to read in your own time. You can probably actually find them on Project Gutenberg, which is Gutenberg, not Gutenberg, no, Gutenberg with an E in the Berg bit. That's the bit I was trying to get for you. I'll type it in. There you go. There's a link for it. Gutenberg.org. B-E-R-G for Gutenberg. Well worth reading, but the age bracket, the focus of the stories is a little bit older than what I would like to be reading at this stage. Probably sometime in the future when I run out of kids' books to read, I'll read teenagers' books. Although they weren't called teenagers back then, were they? Because that's only a reasonably recent history development of words that get used to label people with. So we read these. They're fun. They're sometimes challenging. Some of the social attitudes that come through in them are not the best. There are one or two books which I have chosen not to read because overall the author's attitude or the social attitude that comes through is not one that I want to be dealing with. Books that I have read myself, but I don't think there's a need for them to be out there in the public. I don't censor the books that I'm actually reading. Like, I don't go through and go, I'm not reading that, but I'm not reading that, but, well, I haven't done up till now anyway. Because one of the ways to learn how to be aware that people have different attitudes and those attitudes may or may not be good attitudes is to actually have some exposure to them. And if we don't allow ourselves any exposure to anything except for what we absolutely agree with, our minds don't grow because we don't actually recognize the limitations of what we think or our attitudes. We also don't understand that some things would be okay for us. It's just they're beyond our current understanding. If we limit ourselves to just this narrow field and don't feel where the boundaries are from time to time, we won't actually recognise that there are other bits that can actually fit within our acceptable field of experience. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with listening to or reading things that we don't necessarily agree with. They're very, very good, very, very good for the mind. They help with healthy thinking. Sometimes it changes the way we see something. Sometimes it helps to reinforce our understanding of something, that certain attitudes that used to be held still have become unacceptable and are still unacceptable, which is why they will get read in the stories that I read. So there you go. I do have 3 tips. The 3 tips are: 1, bring some water to drink. You can actually bring some other things to drink as well if you would like to, but I specifically suggest that you do have water. It keeps you hydrated, which means that your body and your mind work a lot better. Your body and your brain. Your brain is where your mind is generally housed. 2, bring something to snack on, because then you won't have to rush off because you're desperately hungry and miss whole chunks of the story. And 3, bring something comfortable to sit on or lie on. Unless, of course, you're studying or working and you're not allowed to do that sort of thing. In which case, do the things you can, but be here. That's cool. Obviously, because I'm reading stories, lurking is fine. I love it if you can say hi and introduce yourself, if that's your sort of, if you're okay with doing that sort of thing in the chat here. And I'm specifically talking at the moment to people who are watching this live on Twitch, because then I can say hi to you back. And then if you wish to, you can actually use a lurk command, which just acknowledges that you are here and you're going to be listening. So the lurk command is !lurk, L-U-R-K. No capitals, no spaces, that's all it is, and then you hit the enter button. So if you're watching this over on YouTube and you're wondering what all of this is about, then look on my profile. Somewhere there will be a link to my Twitch channel. Click on the link and it'll take you to Twitch. On Twitch there are lots of people who are doing things live at any one time. There are a few people who read stories. Not a lot of us, actually, surprisingly, but there are a few. If you join Twitch, same as joining YouTube, it is free. There is probably some stuff that you can do that you have to pay for, but you can do most things for free on Twitch. And so just register, and then if you register on Twitch, then you can follow people, which means that Twitch will tell you when they are live, and you can then interact with them while they're actually there. And it's quite fun, but being able to talk with people who are on the other side of the world in the middle of a game, and you've become quite good friends with them just because you interact with each other regularly online. And I'm quite happy to do that sort of thing with other people chatting with me, and chatting with each other in my chat box on Twitch. But you don't really get quite that sort of sense of immediacy when you're chatting with me on YouTube. So I do encourage you, if you're into trying something new, if you've not done that before, go over to Twitch. It's a little bit of a big place. It can be a bit scary, and there's a lot of there can be some rough language. Can be some rather violent games, because Twitch originally was a gaming platform. But there are other things that people do too. There are people there who do cooking. There are people there who do crafting. There are people there who do artwork. It's wonderful. You will find all sorts of things over there that you can watch. So come and join us over on Twitch. No, it's not the dark side. And if you want to bring cookies, all the better. It's not join the dark side. We have cookies, because I don't. I've got cheese. But you can bring your own cookies. We won't kick you out if you've got cookies. So yeah, I generally don't interact with my chat while I'm actually reading, unless I have asked a question or made an observation and somebody is supplying information that's specific to the story. If I see that and how it fits in with what I'm reading, I will read that out while I'm reading the story. I'll read that comment out from the chat box. Otherwise, in between chapters, I will happily chat with everybody. Anyway, so how about we get going? I think we've had enough explanation of what's going on. I try to keep it a bit shorter than that, but every time we get up to that level of lots and lots and lots of yak. Chat. Explaining things that probably don't need explaining. And yeah, if you're watching this on YouTube, then subscribe and click on the notification bell, because then it will tell you when I put up a new video. And I have actually got all the previous ones up there and scheduled now. Sorry about missing a whole week before, for those of you who like to catch up on YouTube. If you're on Twitch and you've missed a bunch, and the VODs, that's the video on demand recordings, have expired, then they will be available over on YouTube. So and the link for my YouTube channel is on my profile on Twitch. So either way, you can find me. I'm on other social media things as well, like Twitter and Instagram. So I think both of them have links for that sort of thing. Just find it. Go out and have fun exploring all the social media channels and chase rabbit trails and things like that. Discover what sort of things you can find out about all sorts of things. I normally have my phone open on one side of me so I can keep an eye on things. Often I will see things happening on my phone to do with what we're doing with the stream that I won't necessarily notice on my other monitor. I do not understand that, but for some reason they are more noticeable on my phone. Maybe because it's just got that one small screen. That kind of makes sense, I suppose. Just checking once again that my phone is silent. Yes, it is silent. Yay. And clearing all the other bits and pieces out of the background there so that we can get on with what we are doing, which is reading books, because reading books is fun, isn't it? I hope you think so. Otherwise, what are you doing here? Go off and find somebody who's playing first-person shooter games and get your satisfaction from that, because you're not going to get that one here. If you like something that's just a little bit more like, my reading style. My reading style is much more bedtime stories, not audiobooks. They're not crisp. The accents, if I use any accents, are terrible. I'm terrible at accents. And I usually get a bit muddled about who's meant to be speaking with which accent because I haven't skimmed ahead. I haven't scanned ahead to see who it is who's speaking, and I'll often start with the wrong accent on a sentence. That happens. I interrupt myself and I get lost halfway through sentences as I'm actually reading them. It's all part of the fun. Anyway, and if you're a Twitch aficionado, if you really know what you're doing on Twitch and you're listening and I do something that you think is hilarious or tragic or mildly amusing or whatever, and you think it's something that needs to be kept for posterity, then please clip it. And it always amuses me to see what's been clipped. And I'm trying to get together a little bunch of different clips so I can, make something funny out of it. That would be good, wouldn't it? Anyway, so yeah, let's go for it. Let's read. Here we go. Emily of New Moon by L.M. Montgomery. And we are reading Chapter 15, Various Tragedies. Emily, obedient to Aunt Elizabeth's command, had eliminated the word bull from her vocabulary, but to ignore the existence of bulls was not to do away with them. And specifically with Mr. James Lee's English bull, who inhabited the big windy pasture west of Blair Water, and who bore a dreadful reputation. He was certainly an awesome-looking creature, and Emily sometimes had fearful dreams of being chased by him and being unable to move. And one sharp November day, these dreams came true. Have you ever seen a bull in real life, like face to face? They usually, unless it's one of the unusual breeds of cattle, they're usually enormous, and they're like so muscly and bigger than even just normal cows. Cows are actually a lot bigger than people are used to, and when they first meet them face to face, they can be a little bit freaky. But bulls are even bigger, and it's like, oh my goodness, that's scary big. And then if they start running after you, you can feel the ground shaking. The weight of them is such that the ground is like ka-thump, ka-thump, ka-thump as they run after you. Sorry, I'm just having a piece of cheese. It's gone soft, so I had to tear it off and it stuck to my finger, my thumb. Anyway, and one sharp November day, these dreams came true. There was a certain well at the far end of the pasture concerning which Emily felt a curiosity, because Cousin Jimmy had told her a dreadful tale about it. I'm wondering if Cousin Jimmy is being a bit of a stirrer as well. I think he's brighter than people think. They let him get away with a lot because they believed that he was brain damaged when his sister, cousin, whoever it was, pushed him over and he fell down the well. Not this well. But I think they have given him freedom to be himself in a way that most others at the time were not. I think he's less brain damaged than they think. Anyway, but he's a storyteller and he makes up his own poems. So he had told her a tale about it. The well had been dug 60 years ago by two brothers who lived in a little house which was built down near the shore. It was a very deep well, which was considered a curious thing in that low-lying land near pond and sea. The brothers had gone 90 feet before they had found a spring. Then the sides of the well had been stoned up, but the work never went further. So you put stones, you dig a hole down, and then you line it with stones to stop all the rubble and the rocks and the mud and everything else that's in the ground that you're cutting through from falling into it and making it messy, because that's going to be your water supply. So let's carry on. The sides of the well had been stoned up, but the work never went further. Thomas and Silas Lee had quarrelled over some trivial difference of opinion as to what kind of a hood should be put over it. That's the roof top, I think. And in the heat of his anger, Silas had struck Thomas on the head with his hammer and killed him. The well house had never been built. Silas Lee was sent to prison for manslaughter and died there. The farm passed to another brother, Mr. James Lee's father, who moved the house to the other end of it and planked the well over, so he covered it so it was never used. Cousin Jimmy added that Tom Lee's ghost was supposed to haunt the scene of his tragic death, but he couldn't vouch for that, though he had written a poem on it. A very eerie poem it was too, and made Emily's blood run cold with a fearful joy when he recited it to her one misty night by the big potato pot. Ever since, she had wanted to see the old well. Her chance came one Saturday when she was prowling alone in the old graveyard. Beyond it lay the Lee pasture, and there was apparently not a sign of a bull in or about it. So obviously they usually keep a bull in this pasture. That's why she's noticing that there's not one. Emily decided to pay a visit to the old well and went skimming down the field against the sweep of the north wind racing across the gulf. The Wind Woman was a giantess that day, and a mighty swirl she was stirring up along the shore, but as Emily drew near the big sand dunes, they made a little harbour of calmness about the old well. So she's being near in behind the sand dunes away from the actual shore. There's just a little patch of windless area, wind shadow, which is sometimes it's quite pleasant if you've been somewhere where it's windy all the time to just get into a space where you're not in the wind. Emily coolly lifted up one of the planks, knelt on the others, and peered down. Fortunately, the planks were strong and comparatively new. Otherwise, the small maiden of New Moon might have explored the well more thoroughly than she desired to do. As it was, she could see little of it. Huge ferns grew thickly out of the crevices among the stones of its sides and reached across it, shutting out the view of its gloomy depths. Rather disappointed, Emily replaced the plank, and started homeward. She had not gone 10 steps before she stopped. Mr. James Lee's bull was coming straight towards her and was less than 20 yards away, which is roughly 20 metres. The shore fence was not far behind Emily, and she might possibly have reached it in time had she run, but she was incapable of running. As she wrote that night in her letter to her father, she was paralysed with terror and could no more move than she could in her dreams of this very occurrence. It is quite conceivable that a dreadful thing might have happened then and there had not a certain boy been sitting on the shore fence. He had been sitting there unnoticed all the time that Emily had been peering into the well. Now he sprang down. Emily saw, or sensed, a sturdy body dashing past her. The owner thereof ran to within 10 feet of the bull, hurled a stone squarely into the monster's hairy face, then sped off at right angles towards the side fence. The bull, thus insulted, turned with a menacing rumble and lumbered off after this intruder. "Run now!" screamed the boy over his shoulder to Emily. Emily did not run. Terrified as she was, there was something in her that would not let her run until she saw whether her gallant rescuer made good his escape. He reached his fence in the nick of time, and then, and not till then, Emily ran too, and scrambled over the shore fence just as the bull started back across the pasture, evidently determined to catch somebody. Trembling, she made her way through the spiky grass of the sandhills and met the boy at the corner. They stood and looked at each other for a moment. The boy was a stranger to Emily. He had a cheery, impudent, clean-cut face with keen grey eyes and plenty of tawny curls. He wore as few clothes as decency permitted and had only the pretence of a hat. Emily liked him, and there was nothing of Teddy's subtle charm in him, but he had a certain forceful attraction of his own, and he had just saved her from a terrible death. "Thank you," said Emily shyly, looking up at him with great grey eyes that looked blue under her long lashes. It was a very effective look which lost nothing of effectiveness from being wholly unconscious, not deliberate. Nobody had yet told Emily how very winsome that shy, sudden up-glance of hers was. "Isn't he a rip-snorter?" said the boy easily. He thrust his hands into his ragged pockets and stared at Emily so fixedly that she dropped her eyes in confusion, thereby doing further damage with those demure lids and silken fringes. "He's dreadful," she said with a shudder, "and I was so scared. Where were you now? And me thinking you were full of grit to be standing there like that, looking at him, cool as a cucumber. What's it like to be afraid?" "Weren't you ever afraid?" said Emily. "No, don't know what it's like," said the boy carelessly and a bit boastfully. "What's your name?" "Emily Bird Star. Live around here?" he said. "I live at New Moon." "Where simple Jimmy Murray lives?" "He isn't simple," said Emily indignantly. "Oh, right. I don't know him. But I'm going to hire with him for chore boy for the winter." "I didn't know," said Emily, surprised. "Are you really?" "Yep. I didn't know it myself till just this minute. He was asking Aunt Tom about me last week, but I didn't mean to hire out then. Now I guess I will. Want to know my name?" "Of course. Perry Miller. I live with my old beast of an Aunt Tom down at Stovepipe Town. Dad was a sea captain and I used to sail with him when he was alive. Sailed everywhere. Go to school?" "Yes," said Emily. "I don't. Never did. Aunt Tom lives so far away. Anyhow, I didn't think I'd like it. Guess I'll go now, though." "Can't you read?" asked Emily wonderingly. "Yes, some. And figure," that means doing numbers. "Dad learned me some when he was alive. I hain't bothered with it since. I'd rather be down round the harbour. Great fun there. But if I make up my mind to go to school, I'll learn like thunder. I suppose you're awful clever." "No, not very. Father said I was a genius, but Aunt Elizabeth says I'm just queer." "What's a genius?" he said. "I'm not sure. Sometimes it's a person who writes poetry." "I write poetry," she said. Perry stared at her. "Golly, I'll write poetry too then." He obviously admires her. "I don't believe you could write poetry," said Emily, a little disdainfully, it must be admitted. "Teddy can't, and he's very clever." "Who's Teddy?" "A friend of mine." There was just a trace of stiffness in Emily's voice. "Then," said Perry, folding his arms across his chest and scowling, "I'm going to punch this friend of yours' head for him." "You're not!" cried Emily. She was very indignant and quite forgot for the moment that Perry had rescued her from the bull. She tossed her own head and started homeward. Perry turned too. "May as well go up and see Jimmy Murray about hiring afore I go home," he said. "Don't be mad now. If you don't want anybody's head punched, I won't punch it. Only you've got to like me too." "Why, of course I'll like you," said Emily, as if there would be no question about it. She smiled her slow, blossoming smile at Perry, and thereby reduced him to hopeless bondage. 2 days later, Perry Miller was installed as chore boy at New Moon, and in a fortnight's time Emily felt as if he must have been there always. Aunt Elizabeth didn't want cousin Jimmy to hire him, she wrote to her father, because he was one of the boys who did a dreadful thing one night last fall. They changed all the horses that were tied to the fence one Sunday night when preaching was going on, and when folks came out, the confusion was awful. Aunt Elizabeth said it wouldn't be safe to have him round the place, but cousin Jimmy said it was awful hard to get a chore boy, and that we owed Perry something for saving my life from the bull. So Aunt Elizabeth gave in and lets him sit at the table with us, but he has to stay in the kitchen in the evenings. The rest of us are in the sitting room, but I am allowed to go out and help Perry with his lessons. He can only have one candle, and the light is very dim. It keeps us snuffing it all the time. It's great fun to snuff candles. Perry is head of his class in school already. He's only in the 3rd book, although he's nearly 12. Miss Brownell said something sarcastic to him the first day in school, and he just threw back his head and laughed loud and long. Miss Brownell gave him a whipping for it, but she has never been sarcastic to him again. She does not like to be laughed at, I can see. Perry isn't afraid of anything. I thought he might not go to school anymore when she whipped him, but he says a little thing like that isn't going to keep him from getting an education since he has made up his mind to it. He is very determined. This is all what Emily's writing in her letter to her father. Basically, she's journaling, but she's addressing it to her father, who is dead, and she writes him these letters. Aunt Elizabeth is determined too, but she says Perry is stubborn. I am teaching Perry grammar. He says he wants to learn to speak properly. I told him he should not call his Aunt Tom an old beast, but he said he had to because she wasn't a young beast. He says the place he lives in is called Stovepipe Town because the houses have no chimneys, only pipes sticking out of the roof. But he would live in a mansion some day. Aunt Elizabeth says I ought not to be so friendly with a hired boy, but he is a nice boy, though his manners are crude. Aunt Laura says they are crude. Crude is spelt C-R-O-O-D. I don't know what it means, but I guess it means he always says what he thinks right out and eats beans with his knife. I like Perry, but in a different way from Teddy. Isn't it funny, dear father, how many kinds of ways of liking there are? I don't think Ilse likes him. She makes fun of his ignorance and turns up her nose at him because his clothes are patched, though her own clothes are queer enough. Teddy doesn't like him much, and he drew such a funny picture of Perry hanging by his heels from a gallows. The face looked like Perry's, and still it didn't. Cousin Jimmy said it was a caricature and laughed at it, but I dared not show it to Perry for fear he would punch Teddy's head. I showed it to Ilse, and she got mad and tore it in two. I can't imagine why. I think maybe Ilse actually likes him and doesn't want anyone to know. Perry says he can recite as well as Ilse and could draw pictures too if he put his mind to it. I can see he doesn't like to think anybody can do anything he can't, but he can't see the wallpaper in the air like I can, though he tries, until I fear he will strain his eyes. He can make better speeches than any of us. He says he used to mean to be a sailor like his father, but now he thinks he will be a lawyer when he grows up and go to Parliament. Teddy is going to be an artist if his mother will let him, and Ilse is going to be a concert reciter. There is another name, but I don't know how it is spelled, and I'm going to be a poetess. I think we are a talented crowd. Perhaps that is a vain thing to say, dear father. Sorry, itchy. Just checking. Good. When I started the stream today, it kept on dropping frames, but it seems to have stabilised because it's down to a very low percentage. They are still happening, but I think the percentage is dropping because it's not dropping some now, as far as I can tell. So it's just averaging it out. As the longer we stream, the more it improves. So we'll see how we go. A very terrible thing happened the day before yesterday. On Saturday morning, we were at family prayers, all kneeling down, quite solemn around the kitchen. I just looked at Perry once and he made such a funny face at me that I laughed right out loud before I could help it. That was not a terrible thing, the laughing. Aunt Elizabeth was very angry. I would not tell that it was Perry made me laugh because I was afraid he might be sent away if I did. So Aunt Elizabeth said I was to be punished and I was not let go to Jenny Strang's party in the afternoon. It was a dreadful disappointment, but it was not the terrible thing either. Perry was away with Cousin Jimmy all day, and when he came home that night, he said to me, very fierce, "Who has been making you cry?" I said I had been crying, a little but not much, because I was not let go to the party because I had laughed at prayers, and Perry marched right up to Aunt Elizabeth and told her it was all his fault that I laughed. Aunt Elizabeth said I should not have laughed anyhow, but Aunt Laura was grievously upset and said my punishment had been far too severe, and she said that she would let me wear her pearl ring to school on Monday to make up for it. I was enraptured, for it is a lovely ring and no other girl has one. As soon as roll call was over on Monday morning, I put up my hand to ask Miss Brownell a question, but really to show off the ring. That was wicked pride, and I was punished. At recess, Cora Lee, one of the big girls in the 6th class, came and asked me to let her wear the ring for a while. I didn't want to, but she said if I didn't, she would get all the girls in my class to send me to Coventry, which is a dreadful thing, dear father, and makes you feel like an outcast. Sending someone to Coventry is a euphemism. It was a common term used to mean that basically everyone is going to ignore you, going to shun you. And I don't know where the phrase has come from, so maybe you can look that up while you're listening. Hi, C. Good to see you here. Right, I shall carry on. You can look that up. Anyone who's here listening, doesn't have to be C doing it. You can look that up. put it in the chat, and if I spot it in time before we get to the end of the chapter, and while it's still relevant, I'll read out the definition so that those who are over on YouTube can actually find out what it means as well. What it actually means. Sending someone to Coventry, that's what it's called. And also Coventry was an actual place. That's probably what it's named after. It's a dreadful thing, dear father, and makes you feel like an outcast. So I let her, and she kept it on till the afternoon recess. Then she came and told me she had lost it in the brook. This was the terrible thing. Oh, father dear, I was nearly wild. I dared not go home and face Aunt Laura. I had promised her I would be so careful of the ring, I thought I might earn money to get her another ring. But when I figured it out on my slate, I knew I would have to wash dishes for 20 years to do it. I wept in my despair. Perry saw me, and after school he marched up to Cora Lee and said, "You fork over that ring or I'll tell Miss Brownell about it." And Cora Lee forked it over, very meek, and said I was going to give it to her anyhow. I was just playing a joke. And Perry said, "Don't you play any more jokes on Emily or I will joke you." It is very comforting to have such a champion. I trembled to think what it would have been like if I had had to go home and tell Aunt Laura I had lost her ring. But it was cruel of Cora Lee to tell me she had lost it when she had not, and harrow up my mind so. I could not be so cruel to an orphan girl. When I got home, I looked in the glass to see if my hair had turned white from the terror. I am told that sometimes that happens, but it hadn't. Perry knows more geography than any of us, because he has seen nearly everywhere in the world with his father. He tells me such fascinating stories after his lessons are done. He talks till the candle is burned to the last inch, and then he uses that to go to bed with up the black hole into the kitchen loft. Oh, there's a reference at the beginning of the book to when she first moves to this house. There's a black hole in the kitchen ceiling. And because she arrived in the middle of the night and there was only candle lighting everywhere, things like, lanterns, can't remember which, candles, that's what it was. And it was a new house and she was extremely tired and also was still going through major grief from her father's death, and also the whole family being... Sorry about the time out there, CJ. Just pretend that didn't happen and I'll see what I can sort out with putting the words that you put there back into the chat. It's probably because of the length of what you said, and it's probably part of my anti-spammers, because I have had spammers. There you go. I've just copied and pasted what you put in. A part of my anti-spammers setup, because I have been spam botted and it wasn't nice, and also some nasty folk coming into the chat. So I need to actually tweak those so people who are here that I know can actually say a little bit more, but I'm not quite sure. I have to spend a bit more time on that. It's possibly because that was apart from saying hi at the beginning, it's the first time you've basically said anything in my chat of my streaming sessions. So please ignore that and read the information, and I'll read it out for those who are on YouTube. To send someone to Coventry. To send someone to Coventry is an idiom used in England meaning to deliberately ostracise someone. Typically, this is done by not talking to them, avoiding their company, and acting as if they no longer exist. Victims are treated as though they were completely invisible and inaudible. Coventry is, by the way, a cathedral city historically in Warwickshire. I don't know what the county is now called, so that's what the reference to historically is from, because the city hasn't been moved, but the name of the county that it's in, or the county boundary lines might be. Thanks, see, that's great. Yes, I'm glad that you figured out that that was what was going on. That's one thing that's really cool about having people involved with the chat who have been involved with streaming quite a bit themselves before. They usually understand when something like that happens, unlike my other chat participants who really have not done this before, and they just get freaked out when something doesn't work quite the way they're expecting it to, such as they're not being allowed to talk initially because they're not aware that you can actually get spam botted or have people who are not appropriate commenting inappropriate things in your chat while you're actually reading. And if someone is new to Twitch and that happens, it freaks them out and they never come back again often. So that's why I have some quite strict rules on some of the setups, but I will actually have to check to see what else is going on. Anyway, but yes, quite possibly the length of text. So, yeah, all that explanation for those who are new here, because I'm pretty sure that C knows all that. So I'll carry on reading the story. So that's right, I was explaining. The black hole was this access hatchway with no lid on it that's in the ceiling in the kitchen. And so, I think it's the kitchen. And so, yes, and it turns out she found out a day or two later that that's the access way to get up into the loft above the kitchen, which is, I don't know, used for storage and bits and pieces, but it's also now where the hired help, Perry, gets to sleep. That's his room. Thanks. Yeah, definitely got an accent. Especially if you come from somewhere like the States, I will definitely have an accent. I have a lot of relations in Canada, and in theory I should be able to read this with a Canadian accent, but I lived in Canada for a few months when I was really, really, really little, and so I never actually picked up on the accent. Unlike a friend of mine who was born in New Zealand, has a Canadian and Kiwi accent, but her mother is originally Canadian. And she's lived almost all of her life here in New Zealand, but has this quasi-Kiwi Canadian accent. It's quite amusing. Anyway, so we're going to carry on reading. We've now explained what the black hole is, for those who need to know, and that's where he goes to bed. Aunt Elizabeth will not let him have more than one candle in a night. So they spend all their time talking. They burn the candle down, so there's only a tiny little stub left, and he uses that for getting upstairs to where his bedroom is. Ilse and I had a fight yesterday about which we'd rather be, Joan of Arc or Frances Willard. This is still Emily writing to her father, which is why it sounds slightly different. We didn't begin it as a fight, but just as an argument, but it ended that way. I would rather be Frances Willard because she is alive. We had the first snow yesterday. I made a poem on it. This is it. Along the snow the sunbeams glide, earth is a peerless gleaming bride, dripping with diamonds, clad in trailing white, no bride was ever half so fair and bright. I read it to Perry and he said he could make poetry just as good, and he said, right off, Mike has made a long row of tracks across the snow. Now, isn't that as good as yours? He said. I didn't think it was, because you could say it just as well in prose, but when you talk of peerless gleaming brides in prose, it sounds funny. Mike did make a row of little tracks right across the barn field, and they looked so pretty. Mike's the cat, by the way. And they looked so pretty, but not so pretty as the mice tracks in some flour Cousin Jimmy spilled on the granary floor. They are the dearest little things. They look like poetry. I am sorry winter has come, because Ilse and I can't play in our house in Lofty John's bush any more till spring or outside at the tansy patch. Her punctuation is a little bit, yeah. So sometimes it sounds a little odd the way the sentences flow. Lofty John's bush, there's a patch of regrowth woods or forest on the neighbouring property. And they've got a little hut that they've built down in the bush, down in the forest. So that's what the reference is there. For those who haven't been listening up until now. Sometimes we play indoors at the tansy patch. That's at the other boy's place where he lives. I can't remember his name now. Anyway, we'll carry on reading. Sometimes we play indoors at the tansy patch, but Mrs. Kent makes us feel queer. She sits and watches us all the time. So we don't go only when Teddy coaxes very hard. That's right, that's where Teddy lives, not Perry, Teddy. Only when Teddy coaxes very hard. And the pigs have been killed, poor things, so Cousin Jimmy doesn't boil for them anymore. But there is one consolation. I do not have to wear a sunbonnet to school now. Aunt Laura made me such a pretty red hood with ribbons on it, at which Aunt Elizabeth looked scornfully, saying it was extravagant. I like school here better every day, but I can't like Miss Brownell. That's the teacher. She isn't fair. She told us she would give the one who wrote the best composition a pink ribbon to wear from Friday night to Monday. I wrote the Brooks story about the brook in Lofty John's bush, all its adventures and thoughts, and Miss Brownell said I must have copied it. And Rhoda Stewart got the ribbon. Aunt Elizabeth said, you waste enough time writing trash. I think you might have won that ribbon. She was mortified, I think, because I had disgraced New Moon by not getting it, but I did not tell her what had happened. Teddy says a good sport never whines over losing. I want to be a good sport. Rhoda is so hateful to me now. Rhoda was her first friend. Turns out she wasn't really. She says she is surprised that a New Moon girl should have a hired boy for a beau. A beau is like a boyfriend. It's back in the old, more formal days. Oh, Island of the Blue Dolphins. Sorry, I'm just going to read out this comment. I have a children's book recommendation. It's not really old, but it was a book that I really loved as a kid. Island of the Blue Dolphins, written by Scott Odell in 1960. I remember reading that, and I was stuck in my head on the Island of the Blue Dolphins for months afterwards. I kept on imagining being back there. We'll have a bit more of a chat about those sort of ones afterwards, if you remind me, if you're still here. And I would love to. I need to check on to see if on the validity of me actually reading that, because it's a little bit like playing music that's copyrighted. They can do bans on things, and I don't really want to do that because all I do is read books. So I need to find out if I can actually read that online. I would love to. A really neat book. Quite stretched my mind in a lot of ways, just because I'd never really thought about what it must have been like living somewhere like that. Anyway, I'll carry on reading, and you can keep on chatting too. That's great, and I'll pick up on it when I can. So Rhoda says she's surprised that a New Moon girl should have a hired boy for a beau. That is very silly, because Perry is not my beau. Perry told her she had more gab than sense. That was not polite, but it is true. One day in class, Rhoda said the moon was situated east of Canada. Perry laughed right out, and Miss Brownell made him stay in at recess, but she never said anything to Rhoda for saying such a ridiculous thing. But the meanest thing Rhoda said was that she had forgiven me for the way I had used her. That made my blood boil, when I hadn't done anything to be given for. The idea! We have begun to eat the big beef ham that hung in the southwest corner of the kitchen. I know these days ham is made from pork, but in this particular era, ham often also referred to a way of preparing meat so that it was a storage product that didn't need to be kept chilled. So it would be salted and smoked and dried, and then you could actually use it later in the year, away from the season when the meat was fresh and freshly available. We have begun to eat the big beef ham that hung in the southwest corner of the kitchen. The other Wednesday night, Perry and I helped cousin Jimmy pick a road through the turnips in the first cellar. So these are storage vegetables in the cellar, and they have to find a way to get through them. We had to go through it to the second cellar because the outside hatch is banked up now. It was great fun. So it's probably banked up to keep it from getting too much exposure to the cold, which would damage the vegetables if they got frozen in winter. It was great fun. We had a candle stuck up in a hole in the wall, and it made such lovely shadows, and we could eat all the apples we wanted from the big barrel in the corner, and the spirit moved cousin Jimmy to recite some of his poetry as he threw the turnips, because they're throwing them to get them out of the way so they can make this pass through to the other cellar. I am reading the Alhambra. It belongs to our bookcase. Aunt Elizabeth does not like to say it isn't fit for me to read because it was one of her father's books. But I don't believe she approves because she knits very furiously and looks black at me over her glasses. I don't know anything about that book. That's one that you can find out about. I'm pretty sure it was a real book. The Alhambra, Alhambra. There you go. Teddy lent me his Hans Andersen stories. I love them. I always think of a different end for the Ice Maiden and save Rudy. They say Mrs. John Killigrew has swallowed her wedding ring. I wonder what she did that for. Cousin Jimmy says there is to be an eclipse of the sun in December. I hope it won't interfere with Christmas. My hands are chapped. Aunt Laura rubs mutton tallow on them every night when I go to bed. It's hard to write poetry with chapped hands. I wonder if Mrs. Hemans ever had chapped hands. It does not mention anything like that in her biography. So, if you live somewhere where there is a cold wind and it's very cold, dry weather, even if it's not specifically cold, but the humidity is very, very low, then the moisture that's in your skin dries out very quickly and easily, and then you get cracks in the skin. That's chapped. So chapped lips are when they get cracked because they get dry when the weather is cold. And so chapped hands would be very painful because chapped lips are bad enough. Anyway, we'll carry on. We're still reading the letter to her father, and I think we'll finish the chapter on the end of the letter, and then we'll start another chapter. I'm guessing we have enough time. Jimmy Ball has to be a minister when he grows up. His mother told Aunt Laura that she consecrated him to it in his cradle. I wonder how she did it. We have breakfast by candlelight now, and I like it. Ilse was up here Sunday afternoon, and we went up in the garret and talked about God, because that is proper on Sundays. So the garret, for those who are not used to that terminology, is like an attic space in the top of a house. Often it was used as a place where, in the days of servants, that's where they would have their bedrooms, in the garret. If you had the garret. A Little Princess, one of the other books I've read by whoever it was who wrote The Secret Garden. A Little Princess, she lived in the garret. So that's the rooms up in the top of the house. Not well weathered, not insulated, or anything like that. Usually where you put someone to sort of get rid of them, forget it that they're even there as part of your house. But she uses this as her secret space, her own play space, and where she does her writing. So just because not everybody who listens will know what a garret is. Sorry. We talked about God because this is proper on Sundays. We have to be very careful what we do on Sundays. It is a tradition of New Moon to keep Sundays very holy. Grandfather Murray was very strict. Cousin Jimmy told me a story about him. They always cut the wood for Sunday on Saturday night. This is back in the days when people didn't do any work on a Sunday. It was considered that sacred. Sorry. They always cut the wood for Sunday on Saturday night, but one time they forgot and there was no wood on Sunday to cook the dinner. So Grandfather Murray said, "You must not cut wood on Sundays, boys, but just break a little with the back of the axe." It's kind of, yeah, okay. Ilse is very curious about God, although she doesn't believe in him most of the time and doesn't like to talk about him, but still wants to find out about him. She says she thinks she might like him if she knew him. She spells his name with a capital G now because it is best to be on the safe side. I think God is just like my flash. That's her moments of inspiration, when it feels to her like she's actually almost in another world where her awareness of everything is completely different. She refers to it as the flash. I think God is just like my flash, only it lasts only a second and he lasts always. We talked so long we got hungry, and I went down to the sitting room cupboard and got 2 donuts. I forgot Aunt Elizabeth had told me I could not have donuts between meals. It was not stealing, it was just forgetting. But Ilse got mad at the last and said I was a she-Jacobite, whatever that is, and a thief, and that no Christian would steal donuts from her poor old aunt. So I went and confessed to Aunt Elizabeth. And she said I was not to have a donut at supper. It was hard to see the others eating them. I thought Perry ate his very quick, but after supper he beckoned me out of doors and gave me half of his donut. which he had kept for me. He had wrapped it in his handkerchief, which was not very clean, but I ate it because I did not want to hurt his feelings. Yes, my parents grew up that way. Sorry, I'm just reading the chat. C says, I grew up that way. No work, no hunting, fishing, or anything like that on a Sunday. It was a little bit more relaxed in my family, but there were others I knew in our area where absolutely you did not do anything that was fun on a Sunday, and you didn't do anything that might be considered work on a Sunday. Actually, I remember talking about it with my dad, and he was saying that of the local families when he was growing up, those who were doing work that was based on the land, like farming, and used horses for doing jobs on the farm, were not allowed to ride horses on Sunday because it was associated with work. And those who did things like fishing and gathering shellfish and things like that, and seaweed for gardens and stuff like that as part of their job during the week, were not allowed to go out in a boat on a Sunday. Were not allowed to go for a row or for a sail to relax. They were allowed to do some things that were a little bit fun, but not exciting fun, just quiet fun. But yes, it was to do with the things that were considered by these relative families what was work, and if it was specifically a work thing, they were not allowed to have anything to do with it. And like I say, fun was always very quiet, gentle sort of fun, not raucous, not ball games or anything like that, just the way it was. It's funny how things can change so much within one lifetime. Anyway, I'm carrying on. And yes, I did see your comment that you got yourself a hardcover copy of the book. I'm glad you did. I love it when that sort of thing comes up and you get that opportunity. He gave her his half donut and she ate it because she didn't want to hurt his feelings. Aunt Laura says Ilse has a nice smile. I wonder if I have a nice smile. I looked at the glass in Ilse's room and smiled, but it did not seem very nice. Yes, when you try to smile at yourself and you're aware of it, it doesn't usually look that great. Now the nights have got cold. Aunt Elizabeth always puts a gin jar full of hot water in the bed. I like to put my toes against it. That is all we use the gin jar for nowadays, but Grandfather Murray used to keep real gin in it. Gin may have been something they made at home, I'm not sure. Now that the snow has come, Cousin Jimmy can't work in his garden anymore, and he is very lonesome. I think the garden is just as pretty in winter as in summer. There are such pretty dimples and baby hills where the snow has covered up the flower beds, and in the evenings it is all pink and rosy at sunset, and by moonlight it is like dreamland. I like to look out of the sitting room window at it and watch the rabbit's candles floating in the air above it, and wonder what all the little roots and seeds are thinking of down under the snow. I'm guessing rabbit's candles is a local nickname for a particular plant. It may be the ones that we call bunny tails, where it's a very, very thin stem and it gets very dry and quite strong, and then it's got a fluffy pom-pommy thing on the top. I'm not sure. And I wonder what all the little roots and seeds are thinking of down under the snow, and it gives me a lovely creepy feeling to look at it through the red glass in the front door. There is a beautiful fringe of icicles along the cookhouse roof, but there will be much more beautiful things in heaven. I was reading about Anzonetta today, and it made me feel religious. Good night, my dearest of fathers, Emily. P.S. That doesn't mean that I have any other father, it's just a way of saying very, very dear. EBS, Emily Birdstar. And that's the end of that chapter. Now we can talk about books before I get into the next chapter, which is a reasonably long one, but I think I'm going to read it anyway because it's Easter weekend, so why not? Sorry, and I'm going to have some cheese and snack on some cheese and have my iced coffee. I hope you've got something nice to drink. I thought of another book that I really enjoyed. After having read Island of the Blue Dolphins, Dolphin Boy, I think it was called. Look that one up. Have you ever read it? I really enjoyed it. It's completely different, but it was another one that I really enjoyed. It's another one, I think, from a similar era. I'm not sure. Dolphin Boy. Let's see if I can find it out. I think that's what it was called. Yes, my keyboard is very loud compared with that. Dolphin Boy by Michael Forman. Let's see if I can find out when it was first published. First published in 1982. It's not old at all. In 1982. Beverly Dunlop. No, this may not be the one I'm thinking of. Can't remember. I thought it was. There was a book about a boy who ends up being shipwrecked or something like that. I'm glad you're listening to it as bedtime stories. A boy who was, I think, shipwrecked and was saved from sharks by a dolphin or something like that. I think that's what it was. I wish there was a way of finding out what books were called that you have memories of and you can't remember what it was called. There's another one I remember reading that was about two girls that had been on a ship, and I think it was meant to be a cruise ship, and the ship had done like a abandoned ship drill, man the lifeboats type drill, and that included actually getting into the lifeboats and going ashore, just so everyone knew what they were doing, because when people were on ships, they used to be for a much longer time. And then that wasn't when it actually happened. It was a little bit later in the story. That was so you knew it gave you a sense of anticipation. That something might be going to happen. And what happened a bit later on was there was something that happened where everybody had to leave where they were on shore, and it was like an island in the middle of nowhere, and the girls had been playing, I suppose, and everyone else was adults, and they got left behind and the ship disappeared. And they're stuck on the island on their own, and for some reason they end up getting to another island where there are some people living on the island, and the island was a bit odd because the main part of the island was up here, but you couldn't get to it unless you went in through a cave and up through sort of like stairs that were up inside this, like a giant well, a shaft that had stairs around it. And I have a feeling that it was supposedly off the coast of Australia in the setting. It may have actually been an Australian story, I don't know. Definitely fiction. But I remember reading that too, and I have no clue what the book was called, who it was by. Usually I remember that much. Or when it was published or anything. At all. But I have these strong memories of certain parts of it, like the cave and the access to the top of the island, and the people lived up on this upper part of the island, and they were farming and things like this. But Island of the Blue Dolphins was the one that really created a strong impression on me. And I think it's actually based on a true story, kind of. I'm not sure. But there's a few like that I remember reading when I was in my mid-teens. And there's another one which is completely different. Not islands, well, it was kind of islands, but it was not about islands. That was, I need to see if I can find that one now. Sorry, I'm just going to look it up. It's set, I think, in the Hebrides Islands off the coast of Scotland, the one that I'm now thinking of. No, not that one. There's two books I used to get mixed up, The Bronze Bow and The Boy with the Bronze Axe. One of them's set in Israel, and the other one's set in the Orkney Islands. The Boy with the Bronze Axe by Kathleen Fiddler. Set in the ancient Stone Age village of Scarabray on Orkney. Fascinating and vividly portrayed story of life nearly 3,000 years ago. This is this other one that I also remember from the same reading period in my life. That's why I was mentioning it. Callie and Brocken are in trouble. They've been using their stone axes to chip limpets off the rocks, but they've gone too far out and find themselves trapped by the tides. Then an unexpected rescuer appears, a strange boy in a strange boat, carrying a strangely sharp axe of a type they have never seen before. So this is Stone Age people meeting someone who has a Bronze Age weapon or tool. So that's another one that's worth having a look for. And I need to find out when it was actually written, because that listing doesn't tell me at all, I think. Anyway, 1968. That's another one that's not public domain. I may have to see if I can find a way of being able to read these stories where it's not going to be a problem if they're not public domain, because these stories are not commonly actually, not because people aren't going to, sorry, I'm just moving something that's irritating me, not because people aren't going to make money off them, because I think that's actually what it's about. Is I'd like to read stories that people have forgotten or have not yet discovered because they're older. I've got a family member who, when we say, oh, we want to watch a movie on Netflix, oh, that's too old, and we're looking at a movie that's made before 2010, and to them that's too old. They only want to watch new movies being ones that have been made in the last 2 years. That's great, but if you watch them all and you want something else to watch, and sometimes it's good to watch something that's quite a lot older. I actually enjoy some of the old black and white ones and things like that. Those are definitely too old, according to them. But it's great because it just gives you a whole other pace and feel and world, and we, as humans, we go through themes with our entertainment. So, I mean, obviously we have lots of action movies these days, and we have done for quite some time, but the way we do them are different. The story point and purpose is different in different time periods. It's just like years ago in the black and white movies era, you had a lot of musicals, and you also had a lot of dance movies that had song and dance in them. Actors weren't just actors, they had to also be singers and dancers, and some of them, like Gene Kelly, fabulous tap dancer, Fred Astaire, fabulous tap dancer, and they could also sing. It's like, okay, well, actors now just act, and some of them only act in one particular style, and that's it, you know. Okay, whatever. But we do that with stories too. We will have a certain trend. It's not that everybody only writes that, but there's a certain way of looking at the world that influences the way a story is written, the way it's constructed. And that's partly what I like about reading these old stories out loud. So that's wonderful. See, what I try and do sometimes is actually write, if I think of a story that I remember reading when I was a kid, even if I can't remember the name, I write down a little bit about it that I can remember as a reminder. And then I leave it, I put it aside. Mentally, I put that aside and I'll carry on with what I'm doing. And sometimes a bit later on, I will then remember something else to do with it that I hadn't thought of before. And it's only because I've written it down that it triggers me remembering other bits. And sometimes you can actually end up remembering enough that either you remember the title or you can then find out what it was online, just because of all these extra little bits and pieces that build together. So they help you. Oh yes, some of the old movies are fabulous. I'm not into modern horror movies, but some of the older ones, great. I tend to be a little bit more offbeat when it comes to that sort of stuff. I'm not major into a lot of that. But, I mean, it's like... Now I'm rambling. There's a certain type of English movies that I really enjoy, more than American ones that are supposedly of the same genre. just because the way they use language and the way they will present a story, where they'll tease you with a story and something will happen and you as the viewer have noticed things, but the people in the story haven't necessarily noticed, and it's left entirely up to you to understand the significance of it. If it's a story with humour in, often they won't explain the joke. Whereas mainstream American movies, often they will explain the joke, just in case you didn't get it. So there's extra little factors that come into it, especially when it depends on where they were produced, who made them, who wrote them. A lot of the old black and white horror ones of certain periods were really testing new boundaries, like the Bela Lugosi ones. I mean, they could become a little bit formulaic in some ways, and yet some of the stuff was brand new in people's imagination. They'd not really thought of anything like that before. And I'm going to carry on reading now. So if you need a drink and you haven't got one, go and grab one now, and then I'll carry on reading. Take your phone with you if you've got me on your phone. That way you don't miss out. And you don't have to wait 2 weeks before you can catch up on it. Right, Emily of New Moon by L.M. Montgomery. We are now reading Chapter 16, Check for Miss Brownell. That sounds odd. We'll find out what it means, shall we? I can't even remember what the last chapter was called. Do you? Check for Miss Brownell. The previous one was Various Tragedies. That was the one that started off with being chased by the bull and meeting Perry. Anyway, we'll carry on. And I'll try not to lean on my desk because it wobbles and it makes everything go like this and squeak. Chapter 16, Check for Miss Brownell. Emily and Ilse were sitting out on the side bench of Blairwater School writing poetry on their slates. At least, Emily was writing poetry and Ilse was reading it as she wrote, and occasionally suggesting a rhyme when Emily was momentarily stuck for one. It may as well be admitted here and now that they had no business whatsoever to be doing this. They should have been doing sums, as Miss Brownell supposed they were, but Emily never did sums when she took it into her black head, she's got black hair, to write poetry, and Ilse hated arithmetic on general principle. Miss Brownell was hearing the geography class at the other side of the room. Small country school, village school, so therefore you have a range of ages in one classroom. Or maybe you have two classrooms, but one teacher has to teach everybody all the different ages that they're dealing with, and so therefore you leave students doing something while you're doing something with the other students, and then you swap them around. So that's why Miss Brownell does not know that the girls are not doing their maths. Miss Brownell was hearing the geography class at the other side of the room. The pleasant sunshine was showering in over them through the big window, and everything seemed propitious. Sorry, big words. Everything seemed propitious, which means inclining towards good, denoting that a lucky and good thing is about to happen. It's hinting at it. For a flight with the muses. Emily began to write a poem about the view from the school window. It was quite a long time since she had been allowed to sit out on the side bench. This was a boon favoured for those pupils who had found favour in Miss Brownell's cold eyes, and Emily had never been one of those. But this afternoon, Ilse had asked for both herself and Emily, and Miss Brownell had let both go, not being able to think of any valid reason for permitting Ilse and refusing Emily, as she would have liked to do. For she had one of those petty natures which never forget or forgive any offence. Emily, on her first day of school, had, so Miss Brownell believed, been guilty of impertinence and defiance, and successful defiance at that. This rankled in Miss Brownell's mind still, and Emily felt its venom in a score of subtle ways. She never received any commendation. She was a target for Miss Brownell's sarcasm continually, and the small favours that other girls received never came her way, so this opportunity to sit on the side bench was a pleasing novelty. There were points about sitting on the side bench. You could see all over the school without turning your head, and Miss Brownell could not sneak up behind you and look over your shoulder to see what you were up to. But in Emily's eyes, the finest thing about it was that you could look right down into the school bush and watch the old spruces where the wind woman played, the long grey-green trails of moss hanging from the branches like banners of Elfland, the little red squirrels running along the fence, and the wonderful white aisles of snow where splashes of sunlight fell like pools of golden wine. And there was one little opening in the trees through which you could see right over the Blairwater Valley to the sandhills and the gulf beyond. Today the sandhills were softly rounded and gleaming white under the snow, but beyond them the gulf was darkly, deeply blue with dazzling white masses of ice, like baby icebergs floating about in it. Just to look at it thrilled Emily with a delight that was unutterable. Line breaks in the middle of words. With a delight that was unutterable, but which yet she must try to utter. She began her poem. Fractions were utterly forgotten. What had numerators and denominators to do with those curving bosoms of white snow, that heavenly blue, those crossed dark fir tips against the pearly skies, those ethereal woodland isles of pearl and gold? Emily was lost to her world, so lost that she did not know the geography class had scattered to their respective seats, and that Miss Brownell, catching sight of Emily's entranced gaze skywards as she searched for a rhyme, was stepping softly towards her. Ilse was drawing a picture on her slate and did not see her, or she would have warned Emily. The latter suddenly felt her slate drawn out of her hand and heard Miss Brownell saying, "I suppose you have finished those sums, Emily." Emily had not finished even one sum. She had only covered her slate with verses that Miss Brownell must not see. Emily sprang to her feet and clutched wildly after her slate, but Miss Brownell, with a smile of malicious enjoyment on her thin lips, held it beyond her reach. "What is this? It does not look exactly like fractions. Lines on the view, VEW, from the window of Blairwater School. Really, children, we seem to have a budding poet amongst us." The words were harmless enough, but oh, the hateful sneer that ran through the tone, the contempt, the mockery that was in it. It seared Emily's soul like a whiplash. Nothing was more terrible to her than the thought of having her beloved poems read by stranger eyes, cold, unsympathetic, derisive stranger eyes. Please, Miss Brownell," she stammered miserably. "Don't read it. I'll rub it off. I'll do my sums right away. Only please don't read it. It isn't anything." Miss Brownell laughed cruelly. "You are too modest, Emily. It is a whole slate full of poetry. Think of that, children. Poetry. We have a pupil in this school who can write poetry, and she does not want us to read this poetry. I am afraid Emily is selfish. I am sure we should all enjoy this poetry." Emily cringed every time Miss Brownell said poetry, with that jeering emphasis and that hateful pause before it. Many of the children giggled, partly because they enjoyed seeing a Murray of New Moon grilled, partly because they realised that Miss Brownell expected them to giggle. Rhoda Stewart giggled louder than anyone else. But Jenny Strang, who had tormented Emily on her first day at school, refused to giggle and scowled blackly at Miss Brownell instead. Miss Brownell held up the slate and read Emily's poem aloud in a sing-song nasal voice with absurd intonations and gestures that made it seem a very ridiculous thing. The lines Emily had thought the finest seemed the most ridiculous. The other pupils laughed more than ever, and Emily felt that the bitterness of the moment could never go out of her heart. The little fancies that had been so beautiful when they came to her as she wrote were shattered and bruised now, like torn and mangled butterflies. "Vistas in some fairy dream," chanted Miss Brownell, shutting her eyes and wagging her head from side to side. The giggles became shouts of laughter. Oh, thought Emily, clenching her hands, I wish the bears that ate the naughty children in the Bible would come and eat you. There was no nice retributive bears in the school bush, however, and Miss Brownell read the whole poem through. She was enjoying herself hugely. To ridicule a pupil always gave her pleasure, and when that pupil was Emily of New Moon, in whose heart and soul she had always sensed something fundamentally different from her own, the pleasure was exquisite. Just going to put in here that people like this should never be teachers. When she reached the end, she handed the slate back to the crimson-cheeked Emily. Take your poetry, Emily, she said. Emily snatched the slate. No slate rag was handy, but Emily gave the palm of her hand a fierce lick, and one side of the slate was wiped off. Another lick, and the rest of the poem went. It had been disgraced, degraded. It must be blotted out of existence. To the end of her life, Emily never forgot the pain and humiliation of that experience. Miss Brownell laughed again. What a pity to obliterate such poetry, Emily, she said. Suppose you do those sums now. They are not poetry, but I am in the school to teach arithmetic, and I am not here to teach the art of writing poetry. Go to your own seat. Yes, Rhoda? For Rhoda Stewart was holding up her hand and snapping her fingers. Please, Miss Brownell, she said with distinct triumph in her tones. Emily Starr has a whole bunch of poetry in her desk. She was reading it to Ilse Burnley this morning when you thought they were learning history. Perry Miller turned around, and a delightful missile compounded of chewed paper and known as a spit pill flew across the room and struck Rhoda squarely in the face. But Miss Brownell was already at Emily's desk, having reached it one jump before Emily herself. Don't touch them, you have no right, gasped Emily frantically. But Miss Brownell had the bunch of poetry in her hands. She turned and walked up to the platform. Emily followed. Those poems were very dear to her. She had composed them during the various stormy recesses when it had been impossible to play out of doors, and written them down on disreputable scraps of paper borrowed from her mates. She had meant to take them home that very evening and copy them on letter bills, and now this horrible woman was going to read them to the whole jeering, giggling school. But Miss Brownell realised that the time was too short for that. She had to content herself with reading over the titles with some appropriate comments. Meanwhile, Perry Miller was relieving his feelings by bombarding Rhoda Stewart with spit pills. We would have called them spitballs. So craftily timed that Rhoda had no idea from what corner of the room they were coming, and could not tell on anyone. They greatly interfered with her enjoyment of Emily's scrape, however. As for Teddy Kent, who did not wage war with spit pills but preferred subtler methods of revenge, he was busy drawing something on a sheet of paper. Rhoda found the sheet on her desk the next morning. On it was depicted a small, scrawny monkey hanging by its tail from a branch, and the face of the monkey was as the face of Rhoda Stewart. Whereat Rhoda Stewart waxed wroth, but for the sake of her own vanity, tore the sketch to tatters and kept silence regarding it. She did not know that Teddy had made a similar sketch, with Miss Brownell figuring as a vampirish-looking bat, and thrust it into Emily's hand as they left school. The Lost Diamond, a romantic tale, read Miss Brownell. Lines on a birch tree. Looks to me more like lines on a very dirty piece of paper, Emily. Lines written to a sundial in our garden. Ditto. Lines to my favourite cat. Another romantic tale, I presume. Ode to Ilse. Thy neck is a wondrous pearly sheen. Hardly that, I should say. Ilse's neck is very sunburnt. A description of our parlour. The violets spell. I hope the violets spell better than you do, Emily. The disappointed house. Lilies lifted up white cups for the bees to drink. I didn't write it that way, cried tortured Emily. Lines to a piece of brocade in Aunt Laura's bureau drawer. Farewell on leaving home. Lines to a spruce tree. It keeps off heat and sun and glare. 'Tis a goodly tree, I ween. Are you quite sure you know what ween means, Emily? Poem on Mr. Tom Bennett's field. Poem on the view from Aunt Elizabeth's window. You are strong on VEWS, Emily. Common spelling mistake that Emily has. She uses it most times she writes the word view. Sorry, I'm just checking that it's actually the right camera that I'm talking to, not the wrong camera. There you go. Emily, epitaph on a drowned kitten. Meditations at the tomb of my great-great-grandmother, poor lady. To my northern birds. Lines composed on the bank of Blair Water, gazing at the stars. Crusted with uncounted gems, those stars, so distant, cold and true. Don't try to pass those lines off as your own, Emily. You couldn't have written them. I did. Emily was white with sense of outrage, and I've written lots far better. Miss Brownell suddenly crumpled the ragged little papers up in her hand. We have wasted enough time over this trash, she said. Go to your seat, Emily. She moved towards the stove. For a moment, Emily did not realise her purpose. Then, as Miss Brownell opened the stove door, Emily understood and bounded forward. She caught at the papers and tore them from Miss Brownell's hand before the latter could tighten her grasp. You shall not burn them. You shall not have them, gasped Emily. She crammed the poems into the pocket of her baby apron. That's the apron that used to be her mother's, I think it was, and it has sleeves, and it's very, very, very old-fashioned, and faced Miss Brownell in a kind of calm rage. The Murray look was on her face, and although Miss Brownell was not so violently affected by it as Aunt Elizabeth had been, it nevertheless gave her an unpleasant sensation, as of having roused forces with which she dared not tamper further. This tormented child looked quite capable of flying at her tooth and claw. Give me those papers, Emily. But she said it rather uncertainly. I will not, said Emily stormily. They are mine. You had no right to them. I wrote them at recesses. I didn't break any rules. You, Emily looked defiantly into Miss Brownell's cold eyes, you are an unjust, tyrannical person. Miss Brownell turned to her desk. I am coming up to New Moon tonight to tell your Aunt Elizabeth of this, she said. Emily was at first too much excited over saving her precious poetry to pay much heed to this threat, but as her excitement ebbed, cold dread flowed in. Oh dear, cold dread, definitely. She knew she had an unpleasant time ahead of her, but at all events they should not get her poems, not one of them, no matter what they did to her. As soon as she got home from school, she flew to the garret and secreted them on the shelf of the old sofa. She wanted terribly to cry, but she would not. Miss Brownell was coming, and Miss Brownell should not see her with red eyes. But her heart burned within her. Some sacred temple of her being had been desecrated and shamed, and more was yet to come. She felt wretchedly sure Aunt Elizabeth was certain to side with Miss Brownell. Sorry, I'm just trying to find where I got to. Emily shrank from the impending ordeal with all the dread of a sensitive, fine-strung nature facing humiliation. She would not have been afraid of justice, but she knew at the bar of Aunt Elizabeth and Miss Brownell she would not have justice. And I can't write to father about it, she thought, her little breast heaving. The shame of it all was too deep and intimate to be written out, and so she could find no relief for her pain. They did not have supper at New Moon in winter time until Cousin Jimmy had finished his chores and was ready to stay in for the night, so Emily was left undisturbed in the garret. From the dormer window she looked down on a dreamland scene that would ordinarily have delighted her. There was a red sunset behind the white distant hills, shining through the dark trees like a great fire. There was a delicate blue tracery of bare branches, bare branch shadows all over the crusted garden. There was a pale, ethereal alpine glow all over the southeastern sky, and presently there was a little lovely new moon in the silvery arch over Lofty John's bush. But Emily found no pleasure in any of them. Presently she saw Miss Brownell coming up the lane under the white arms of the birches with her mannish stride. "If my father was alive," said Emily, looking down at her, "you would go away from this place with a flea in your ear." The minutes passed, each seeming very long to Emily. At last, Aunt Laura came up. "Your Aunt Elizabeth wants you to come down to the kitchen, Emily." Aunt Laura's voice was kind and sad. Emily fought down a sob. She hated to have Aunt Laura think she had been naughty, but she could not trust herself to explain. Aunt Laura would sympathise, and sympathy would break her down. She went silently down the 2 long flights of stairs before Aunt Laura and out to the kitchen. The supper table was set and the candles were lighted. The big black raftered kitchen looked spookish and weird, as it always did by candlelight. Aunt Elizabeth sat rigidly by the table, and her face was very hard. Sorry, just checking something. Her face was very hard. Miss Brownell sat in the rocking chair, her pale eyes glittering with triumphant malice. There seemed something baleful and poisonous in her glare. Also, her nose was very red, which did not add to her charm. Don't forget it's cold, it's winter time. Cousin Jimmy in his grey jumper was perched on the edge of the woodbox, whistling at the ceiling and looking more gnome-like than ever. Perry was nowhere to be seen. Emily was sorry for this. The presence of Perry, who was on her side, would have been a great moral support. "I am sorry to say, Emily, that I have been hearing some very bad things about your behaviour in school today," said Aunt Elizabeth. "No, I don't think you are sorry," said Emily gravely. Now that the crisis had come, she found herself able to confront it coolly. Nay, more, to take a curious interest in it under all her secret fear and shame, as if some part of her had detached itself from the rest and was interestedly absorbing impressions and analysing motives and describing settings. She felt that when she wrote about this scene later on, she must not forget to describe the odd shadows the candle under Aunt Elizabeth's nose cast upwards on her face, producing a rather skeletonic effect. As for Miss Brownell, could she ever have been a baby? A dimpled, fat, laughing baby? The thing was unbelievable. "Don't speak impertinently to me," said Aunt Elizabeth. "You see," said Miss Brownell significantly. "I don't mean to be impertinent, but you are not sorry," persisted Emily. "You are angry because you think I have disgraced New Moon, but you are a little glad that you have got someone to agree with you that I am bad." "What a grateful child," said Miss Brownell, flashing her eyes up at the ceiling, where they encountered a surprising sight. Perry Miller's head, and no more of him, was stuck down out of the black hole, and on Perry Miller's upside-down face was a most disrespectful and impish grimace. Face and head disappeared in a flash, leaving Miss Brownell staring foolishly at the ceiling. "You have been behaving disgracefully in school," said Aunt Elizabeth, who had not seen this byplay. "I am ashamed of you." "It was not as bad as that, Aunt Elizabeth," said Emily steadily. "You see, it was this way." "I do not want to hear anything more about it," said Aunt Elizabeth. "But you must," cried Emily. "It isn't fair to listen only to her side. I was a little bad, but not so bad as she says." "Not another word." "I have heard the whole story," said Aunt Elizabeth grimly. "You heard a pack of lies," said Perry, suddenly sticking his head down through the black hole again. Everybody jumped. even Aunt Elizabeth, who at once became angrier than ever because she had jumped. "Perry Miller, come down out of that loft this instant," she commanded. "Can't," said Perry laconically. "At once, I say." "Can't," repeated Perry, winking audaciously at Miss Brownell. "Perry Miller, come down. I will be obeyed. I am mistress here yet." "Oh, all right," said Perry cheerfully. "If I must." He swung himself down until his toes touched the ladder. Aunt Laura gave a little shriek. Everybody else seemed to be stricken dumb. "I just got my wet duds off," Perry was saying cheerfully, waving his legs about to get a foothold on the ladder while he hung on to the sides of the black hole with his elbows. "Fell into the brook when I was watering the cows. Was going to put on dry ones, but just as you say." "Jimmy," implored poor Elizabeth Murray, surrendering at discretion. She could not cope with the situation. "Perry, get back into that loft and get your clothes on this minute," ordered Cousin Jimmy. The bare legs shot up and disappeared. There was a chuckle as mirthful and malicious as an owl's beyond the black hole. Aunt Elizabeth gave a convulsive gasp of relief and turned to Emily. She was determined to regain ascendancy, and Emily must be thoroughly humbled. "Emily, kneel down here before Miss Brownell and ask her pardon for your conduct today," she said. Into Emily's pale cheek came a scarlet protest. She could not do this. She would ask pardon of Miss Brownell, but not on her knees. To kneel to this cruel woman who had hurt her so, she could not, would not do it. Her whole nature rose up in protest against such a humiliation. "Kneel down," repeated Aunt Elizabeth. Miss Brownell looked pleased and expectant. It would be very satisfying to see this child, who had defied her, kneeling before her as a penitent. Never again, Miss Brownell felt, would Emily be able to look levelly at her with those dauntless eyes that bespoke a soul untamable and free. No matter what punishment might be inflicted upon body or mind, the memory of this moment would always be with Emily. She could never forget that she had knelt in abasement. Emily felt this as clearly as Miss Brownell did, and remained stubbornly on her feet. "Aunt Elizabeth, please let me tell my side of the story," she pleaded. "I have heard all I wish to hear of the matter. You will do as I say, Emily, or you will be outcast in this house until you do. No one will talk to you, play with you, eat with you, have anything to do with you until you have obeyed me." Emily shuddered. That was a punishment she could not face. To be cut off from her world, she knew it would bring her to terms before long. She might as well yield at once, but oh, the bitterness, the shame of it. "A human being should not kneel to anyone but God," said Cousin Jimmy unexpectedly, still staring at the ceiling. A sudden strange change came over Elizabeth Murray's proud, angry face. She stood very still, looking at Cousin Jimmy, stood so long that Miss Brownell made a motion of petulant impatience. "Emily," said Aunt Elizabeth in a different tone, "I was wrong. I shall not ask you to kneel, but you must apologize to your teacher, and I shall punish you later on." Emily put her hands behind her and looked straight into Miss Brownell's eyes again. "I am sorry for anything I did today that was wrong," she said, "and I ask your pardon for it," said Emily. Miss Brownell got on her feet. She felt herself cheated of a legitimate triumph. Whatever Emily's punishment would be, she would not have the satisfaction of seeing it. She could have shaken simple Jimmy Murray with a right good will, but it would hardly do to show all she felt. Elizabeth Murray was not a trustee, but she was the heaviest ratepayer in New Moon and had great influence with the school board. "I shall excuse your conduct if you behave yourself in future, Emily," she said coldly. "I feel that I have only done my duty in putting the matter before your aunt." "No, thank you, Miss Murray. I cannot stay to supper. I want to get home before it is too dark." "Godspeed, all travellers," said Perry cheerfully, climbing down the ladder, this time with his clothes on. Aunt Elizabeth ignored him. She was not going to have a scene with a hired boy before Miss Brownell. The latter switched herself out, moved out of the room, and Aunt Elizabeth looked at Emily. "You will eat your supper alone tonight, Emily. In the pantry you will have bread and milk only, and you will not speak one word to anyone until tomorrow morning." "But you won't forbid me to think," said Emily anxiously. Aunt Elizabeth made no reply, but sat haughtily down at the supper table. Emily went into the pantry and ate her bread and milk, with the odour of the delicious sausages the others were eating for savour. Emily liked sausages, and New Moon sausages were the last word in sausages. Elizabeth Burnley had brought the recipe out from the old country, and its secret was carefully guarded. And Emily was hungry, but she had escaped the unbearable, and things might be worse. It suddenly occurred to her that she could write an epic poem in imitation of the Lay of the Last Minstrel. That's the title of one. Cousin Jimmy had read the lay to her last Saturday. She would begin the first canto right off. Canto's like a verse. When Laura Murray came into the pantry, Emily, her bread and milk only half eaten, was leaning her elbows on the dresser, gazing into space with faintly moving lips, and the light that was never on land or sea in her young eyes. Even the aroma of sausages was forgotten. Was she not drinking from a fount of Casterly? "Emily," said Aunt Laura, shutting the door and looking very lovingly upon Emily out of her kind blue eyes. "You can talk to me all you want to. I don't like Miss Brownell, and I don't think you were altogether in the wrong, although of course you shouldn't be writing poetry when you have sums to do. And there are some ginger cookies in that box." "I don't want to talk to anyone, dear Aunt Laura. I'm too happy," said Emily dreamily. "I'm composing an epic. It is to be called The White Lady, and I've got 20 lines of it made already, and 2 of them are thrilling. The heroine wants to go into a convent, and her father warns her that if she does, she will never be able to, quote, come back to the life you gave, with all its pleasures to the grave. Oh, Aunt Laura, when I composed those lines, the flash came to me, and ginger cookies are nothing to me any more." Aunt Laura smiled again. "Now, just perhaps, dear, not just now, perhaps, dear, but when the moment of inspiration has passed, it will do no harm to remember that the cookies in the box have not been counted, and that they are as much mine as Elizabeth's." And that's the end of that chapter and today's reading. So there you go. Oh my goodness, I remember the sense of terror when I was for the first time I read that bit about Emily's poetry being found and then waved around and derided by Miss Brownell. Oh, and then the injustice of Aunt Elizabeth taking her side, taking Miss Brownell's side. Oh, goodness me, goodness me. Great to have you here, C. It's really, really good. C Gamer 76, for those of you who are wondering who the C is that I'm referring to. Do I have a favourite book or series? I think I have lots of them, but I only ever remember 1 or 2 at a time. I really, really, really like The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. That's who it is. She also wrote A Little Princess, which is another friend's favourite. There's a whole lot. There's a series of books that I read when I was in my mid to late teens, and I have them. Most of the ones in the series that I have are the original style hardcovers, even though some of them are actually falling apart, and other ones where I haven't been able to get those, I've managed to get paperbacks of them. And that's the Swallows and Amazons books by Arthur Ransom, and I would love to read those, or at least the first one here, probably just the first one actually, but I think the copyright is very, very stringently caretaken at this stage, because he didn't die long enough ago for it to be in public domain. If you want to hear The Secret Garden rather than read it yourself, it's in one of my YouTube playlists. And I'll give you the link here anyway, but it's also in my profile. But I'll give you... That's my YouTube profile channel. And if you go to the playlists page of it and then look for Secret Garden in the search box for playlists, and it will show you that playlist, and you can have a listen to that if you want. And it's just like me talking with these ones too. Lots of chatter, lots of yakking about all sorts of stuff, asides, various bits and pieces like that. And a horrendous accent or two in it. Yeah, because it's set in Yorkshire. I can't do a Yorkshire accent. It's just very not a Kiwi English accent that I did. And there were a couple of accents I tried to do because there were people from two different places. One of them was a working class person and one of them was somebody else that was also Yorkshire but from a different part of society, I think. Anyway, so if you want to have a good laugh about me doing terrible accents, then go and listen to my YouTube playlist for The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. There you go. It's lots of fun, and it's a great way to just have something going in the background while you're doing a job or whatever. Drifting off to sleep doesn't really matter. It's the way I listen to audiobooks if I don't do so much now because I don't iron now, but when I used to have to do ironing, I'd wear shirts to work, and they were cotton shirts, old cotton shirts that I'd found through the second-hand shop. I used to iron them, and so I would listen to audiobooks. That was a great way to keep my mind occupied while my hands were doing this job. And also cooking. Audiobooks through my Bluetooth speaker rather than headphones when I'm cooking. Great way to do it, especially Agatha Christie whodunits or MC Beaton's whodunits, such as either the Hamish Macbeth series or the Agatha Raisin series. And if you can get the Agatha Raisin ones that are read by Penelope Keith, they are fabulous. Her intonation, her accents are really good, even though most of us only know her as an English woman with a posh accent. She does some other accents as well when she's reading those. But if you want something to listen to when you're doing jobs and you want an actual audiobook, see if you can borrow them through your local library. That's what we were able to do here in New Zealand. In our part of New Zealand, you can borrow audiobooks through your local library, and it's a great bit of entertainment while you're actually doing something. Although you don't get all this chat, you miss out on that, the real person side of it. But the production is a lot better. Anyway, so lots of fun. I'm trying to think. There's a lot of books that I have absolutely love. The Millie Molly Mandy ones, which are the ones that I first started reading, they're for little children. They're for just before preschool, just before starting school age, right through to the first year or so of school age, but back in a very innocent day and age. And I've read all of those. Those are the first ones I ever read as a live stream. And they're really, really short. They're all done as one playlist. There's about 62 or 65 of them, I'm not sure, of the actual stories. And when we did our first lockdown here in New Zealand, I read most of those, about 2/3 of those, and then I finished them off later on when we went into a second lockdown, I think. I didn't do any reading in the middle there, and then I found the rest of them on audio, on ebooks that I was able to borrow from the library, and I read them. So they're lovely, very innocent, very simple, just a whole other world. Millie Molly Mandy, Secret Garden, I love The Wind in the Willows. The Winnie the Pooh books, I haven't read those. I would love to read those, but once again, I'm not too sure on the copyright status, because I'm pretty sure that Disney actually owns the copyright status now, and they haven't yet gone into public domain. They can only hold on to copyright status for a certain amount of time, and then it's a certain amount of time either after publication or after the author's death that they then become public domain. And it doesn't matter who they are, Disney, they can't do anything about that. That's just the way it is. I have read a lot of fantasy and science fiction, actually, mainly in my mid to late teens and in my early 20s. That's when I hadn't been doing a lot of reading for myself for a while, and I really wanted to get back into it. We had a young guy who was a child of one of the bosses where I worked, who would come in after school and fill in time until his parents finished work and then go home. And he had the mechanical skills of reading but didn't have the ability to read and gain understanding and enjoyment from it, because all the reading he'd been learning to do at school was just the physical skills, just the mental physical coordination. And obviously the teachers weren't giving them anything that was going to really connect. You remember any of the books from when you were learning to read? We had ones called Janet and John. They were a bit better than some of the other ones that we had before them. But they were really, really basic and nothing interesting at all. Anyway, and so this kid was in his 11 or 12, maybe even, I think it was about 11 or 12, and his mum had put him in reading classes because he wasn't reading fluently. And I happened to have some of the old English war comics, commando comics they were called, and so they were illustrated, but they had speech bubbles and captions about things and all this sort of stuff. And one of the I used to get them because they were a bit of fun to read and they weren't very expensive, and they came out every week or every once a month or something like that. And I just had them sitting in my desk cupboard at work. And so he'd be filling in time entertaining himself before his parents went home, and so he'd come and chat with me and stuff. And so he was having a look through my cupboard one day, because he was allowed to, and said, "What are these?" Because they had pictures on the front cover. And I said, "Well, they're war comics, they're set in the Second World War." And he says, "Oh, can I have a look at them?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And he didn't mind because they were all pictures. And so he would read through them because he was looking at the pictures. And then he wanted to know what the story said because he wanted a bit more out of them. And I said, well, initially I would read them to him, and then after a while I would get him to read them to me. And I said, look, you read them, and if you get stuck on a word, spell it out to me and I'll tell you what it says. And so he started doing that. And because he was interested in finding out what was happening in these stories, because he had read the pictures and gained understanding from the pictures, now the words were just adding layers of information to it. He pushed through the hard work side of it until he got to the point where he was actually understanding the story so much more. And then one day his mum said, "What's with these war comics that you're letting my son read? I'm not appreciative of that." And I said, "Yeah, I can understand what you're saying. I'm happy if you don't want him to read them, but do be aware that the main focus of these stories is actually about a bunch of guys learning to work together and look after each other. It's not about the war side of it. The war is just the situation that means they have to do this to overcome the odds. And in my point of view, that's not a bad thing for kids to learn. That we need to work together, we need to overcome the situations we're in, we need to work through stuff and help one another." And she says, "Oh, okay," and let him carry on. He got to the point where he was so fluent with reading, he would get chapter books out of the library, science fiction ones written for teenagers, and read them for himself and get so excited about them that he would bring them into work and read them to me. Pretty good. So it was great that the school and the after classes had actually taught him the skills of reading, but it just hadn't connected with him mentally and emotionally with where he was at for the age group he was at. And it's not uncommon for boys to actually gain fluent reading skills when they're older than when girls do them, because language use, complex language use, is not something that develops at the same rate in testosterone-dominated brains compared with estrogen-dominated brains. And I know in children it's not as dominant, but they are still factors in the way certain connections are made in the brains. So anyway, that was exciting for me that he actually learnt to do that. Got to the point where the others who were sitting at the desks around me had to say, can we have some quiet now, please? No more stories for a little bit. I just want to work quietly and listen to the music in the background. But it was really neat. That was where I realised just how important stories were, not just for me, but for other people. Emily of New Moon's another story I've absolutely loved. If you ever want to read some lightweight science fiction, look for books written by Douglas Hill. There's a series that I think the first book in one of the series is The Caves of Clydar, something like that. Douglas Hill, look him up. Teenage science fiction is great because it's to the point. You have a story, you have development of character, but you don't have so much extensive world building that you forget that we're going anywhere with the story at all. I've read a lot of adult science fiction as well, and there's somewhere it's written by famous authors, and I'm basically I read it right through because I was at the age when you always finish a book. But afterwards I'm like, oh, that was such a waste. That's time I'm not getting back. And I can't tell you anything about what happened in the story. It's just that I was really frustrated. And a lot of the time it was because there was no point of connection for you as the reader. They had built a wonderful world, some other planet, some other star system, some other part of the universe. But there was no sense of connection for you as a reader because everything was so completely new. They were not humanoid characters, one of the books I was reading. All this sort of stuff that there was no way that you as a reader actually got involved with the story yourself. You were looking at something rather than being within it. And a good story for me is something that puts me into it. I become one of the protagonists. Even if it's written third person, which most stories of that sort are, a good story will get you involved, and even if you're not feeling like you are the main character, you are alongside the main character. You sympathise with them. You feel regret for the situations they're going through and all that sort of stuff. To me, that's part of being a well-written story. And most of the stories that I absolutely love, there's an element of that to it. Alice in Wonderland's another great one. Weird, but wonderful. And there's an unofficial sequel that I want to see if I can find and hopefully read. I don't know if I'm pretty sure it's not public domain, but it may be something that's so unknown that I can get permission to read it. But I'd love to. It was one that I read when I was growing up. It seemed a very natural sequel to Alice in Wonderland and then Alice's Adventures Through the Looking Glass. So anyway, there you go, and it's after 5 o'clock. That means I've been streaming for over 2 hours, and I haven't done that for a while, so we're doing well. I haven't dropped too many frames. That's fabulous. And I'm going to be noting down the authors that you mentioned. So C had said, I'm a big fantasy book fan, dragons and magic and such, specifically the Dragonlance books by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, early 80s. I'm currently looking for a good condition copy of the Dragonlance Legends Collector's Edition. That's amazing that he learnt to read that way. That was me referencing the kid that got into seriously reading from my work situation. That's one reason I enjoy those two authors. They really know how to connect the story to the reader. Absolutely. Absolutely. That just makes it work. And different things work for different people. So a story that you like that somebody else doesn't like doesn't mean that it's not a good story. A story that somebody else likes that you don't like doesn't mean it's not a good story. It's just not a good story for you, or not even a good story for you yet. I've had stories that I didn't enjoy the first time I tried reading them, and then I came back to them a number of years later and gave it another go. And whether it's because my life situation at the time was different, or whether it was me having grown and changed, that sort of thing, but somehow or other it was right, and I connected with it and thoroughly enjoyed it. I will have a think about it. I have got a whole lot more stories that I really enjoy. I can't name any one particular best, but I will see what I can come up with. Anyway, so I'm going to sign off now and just say it's been really, really great having you here, getting into conversation with you spurring me on to actually talk about some of the things that I've really enjoyed, and also loathing Miss whatever her name is in that book. I hope you didn't like her. that teacher. Anyway, so good night to you all. For those of you who are in nighttime, good afternoon if you're in New Zealand and Australia. Good morning if you're over in Europe and in England and places like that. And we'll see you next time. Thank you for being here and happy reading. Bye.